Hello everyone! In this video I want to discuss the book The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt was a German political theorist, and she was also Jewish. So during World War II she had to flee from Germany to the United States, and over there she wrote her book. In my opinion, she gave a very good understanding of what a totalitarian system exactly is. Her book contains three parts. One is about imperialism, one is about anti-Semitism, and the last part is about totalitarianism. I want to focus on the last part of the chapter about totalitarianism. And I just want to give you a quick insight in what it is about and why it is very important to read the book for yourself one day. First of all, the totalitarian system needs an ideology. The Nazis had the ideology about that there would be a race struggle throughout all of history, and eventually they believed the Aryan race, they also called the Übermensch, they would thrive and they would be the master race and the strongest of all people and the best of all people. And since there has always been a struggle, and since eventually there is one race superior to the others, it is only moral, in their point of view, to eradicate all other races and let the Aryan race thrive. The communists had a similar ideology, but not about race struggle, but about the class struggle. So there has, in their ideology, there has always been a struggle between classes, you know, the poor people, the rich people, those kind of classes. And eventually, in their point of view, the working class, so the people that work in the factories and stuff and in the mines, they would thrive. And in that way, it was only moral to eradicate the other classes. So it's quite similar, those two ideologies, but the focus is a bit different, but the patterns are pretty much the same. So the problem is that these ideologies were based on science from back then. The struggle of the races and of the classes, mainly of the races, that came from Darwin. He had the idea of survival of the fittest and stuff, and so it was purely based on science. Also Marx, his science about socialism, the communists based their ideology on those people, and it was called science. And since science still in our eyes is only about facts, you can't dispute facts, so you know there's no discussion about it. The thing is also that those people, they thought in matters of eons. They didn't think about what would happen in 5 years. They would only think about what would happen in 100 or 200 years, maybe 300 or 500 years. So they weren't really focused on things of today because their ultimate goal had to be reached. But they knew themselves that they wouldn't reach their goals within their own lifetimes. But they were so convinced of them doing the right thing. And since that is the case, in their eyes, the goal justified the means. And so it became very cruel and very brutal because of them thinking in these terms. they weren't acting according to utility. So we always think about that we have to act with some kind of reason. But the communists and the Nazis didn't really do that. Well, in their eyes, it was very, very logical to, when you were losing the war, just build some new factories where you can burn bodies of Jews and stuff, To us, there's no utility in that. When you're losing the war, why would you keep on murdering people with your lost money? But they were so convinced of doing the right thing that was the only moral thing to do. So it's really crazy. You really have to change your way of thinking into theirs in order to understand it a little bit. The second thing a totalitarian system needs in order to work is a permanent state of instability and lies. So how do you maintain this instability? And why? Why actually would you want the instability? The reason for that is that if there would be stability, people could calculate on things and people could predict things, and they could act on that. But you don't want people to be able to predict things and act on stable factors. No. You want to control everything and everybody. And in order to control everything and everybody, everything needs to be unstable. And that seems very contradictional, but it worked like this. So, for example, the Nazis, and of course also the Soviets, they had secret services. But every time when there was some clarity about the secret service, there was already a new secret service. It could never be clear who was in power. The power was always hidden, and there were always new secret services. So that's the thing, that first there was the SA, then the SS, and then after the SS Sicherheitsdienst. Those were actually more or less the same things, but they replaced each other every time in order to create instability and in order for people not to know who is in power, who is in charge. Another thing is that people couldn't have a job for a very long time. If you would have a job for a longer amount of time, then that would mean that maybe, well, you get stability, but also you can become loyal towards other people instead of the leader, like Hitler and Stalin. And you don't want that. You want to keep the instability. So people had to switch jobs all the time. There had to be no stability whatsoever. And also the lies. It's very important for a totalitarian system to survive, to keep up the lies. The reality or the truth is the biggest threat towards a totalitarian system. Everybody needs to keep lying all the time in order for a totalitarian system to work. It was Alexander Solzhenitsyn that said that if only one person would stop lying, he could throw over a tyranny. And I think there's some truth in that. But in these systems, everybody kept lying, and because of that, they could survive. Well, only for so long, of course. The thing with the lies is also that they didn't adjust their ideology to reality. It was the other way around. Reality was adjusted to their ideology. And that's a constant struggle, and eventually you will lose, because reality is... There's so much of reality. You can't win that fight, but they tried, and actually they did a great job, because look how long the Soviet Union lasted. It's crazy. The third point in order to make a totalitarian system work is terror. Terror is not a mean to reach the goal. Terror is the essence of a totalitarian system. The Nazis and the Soviets, they appointed objective enemies. And objective enemies are enemies that are identified by their group and not by their actions or deeds or their opinions. No, it's only because they are part of a particular group that they are the enemy. So in Nazi Germany, that started with the Jews, but later on also the Polish people, and later on, eventually, that list would get longer and longer and longer. In the Soviet Union, the objective enemy was the upper class, and eventually that list would also expand and expand. The thing is that you need an enemy in order for your system to work, because the system doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Everything goes wrong. But you can't blame yourself. You can't blame the system. The system is perfect. So there need to be enemies. There are enemies that are sabotaging the system. So first of all, you have the objective enemies, but then second of all, you have the, let's say, the internal enemies, the enemies within the, let's say, good group of people, and they are sabotaging everything. Well, they say that when you think for yourself, you are an enemy, because when you think for yourself, even though if you agree with the system, with the party, with the totalitarian system, even though when you agree, you are an enemy. Because when you can think for yourself, then that means that you can also change your mind one day. And when you can change your mind, that's not good. So all people who think for themselves are enemies eventually. So that's why the terror of the totalitarian system only starts when there is no resistance and no opposition anymore. That's the difference with a dictatorship. In a dictatorship, as soon as there's no resistance anymore, as soon as the opposition is eradicated, then everything is more or less fine. There's not really terror anymore. But in a totalitarian system, that's the point where the terror only starts. And that makes it so strange. So it's very strange to understand. But once you get a good understanding of this subject, it starts to make sense more or less. What they did to their enemies, was that normally when you murder someone, there's always a body left behind and memories of that person left behind. So you die, but it's not like you never existed. The point in eradicating people in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany was about completely eradicating people. So the Soviets, they had records about everybody and everything, of who were their friends, who were their family, about everyone. Imagine, that's like a big database. So when you did something wrong, then they would get you, they would murder you, but also not only you, but also your family and friends and stuff. So it was very important for people that their family and friends would behave according to the wishes of the system. In that way, everybody became a spy. Because as soon as your friend got caught about something, then, well, they would murder you too. And you didn't want to die, so you were looking out for signs that maybe someone did something bad and you would turn them in. And if you would turn them in, then you would save your own skin. That was how it worked. So as you know, the Nazis and the Soviets, they murdered so many people, millions of people. But it wasn't just that. And it wasn't just, as I told you, that friends and family were murdered too, and that there would be no memory of you. It was worse than that, because before they died, and this is about what happened in the camps, but what happened in the camps was only, the camps were a laboratorium. Eventually what happened there, they would implement on all of the people of the whole country. And as you know, they were not really interested in sticking with one country. They wanted more countries, because, well, if you want to be totalitarian, it's not about one country, it's about the whole world. But what they did in the camps was not only murdering people and torturing people, it was, they tried to eradicate the complete personality of people. And that's so weird to understand even a little bit, because how can you destroy a personality? The thing is that they want to break down everything, every spontaneous action within people, every spontaneous thought, and create some kind of, like a robot that would only respond to some things, like Pavlov's dog. You know, you're not hungry when you feel hungry. You are hungry when you hear a bell ringing. So that's what happened. People became perverted animals, and that was the goal. If you want to have total control, 100% control, people can't be spontaneous anymore. People can't have their own thoughts anymore. Everything had to be eradicated. And that explains why people wouldn't fight in the camps against their camp guards. And they would just walk to their death without a fight. And that's so crazy. They were changed into perverted animals. And that's so scary. That's so scary. Eventually, you have to think about those crimes. They are so absurd, so great, in the bad way, that, can you even call that a crime? What is murder when you just slaughter millions of people, when you just produce dead bodies? What is murder then? We don't have a legal system that calculated on this. We don't have punishments for crimes like this. It's so beyond your imagination. It's so beyond everything that is familiar to us. How can we ever cope with this? It's so crazy. And the thing is that what makes it so hard is that what the Nazis and the communists did is that they blurred the line between victim and criminal. How they did that is that they put Jews in charge of the camps. They're called Kapo. That is short for Kamppolizei. That means camp police. They made the Jews eradicate their own people. Otherwise, they and their friends would be murdered. So they had to choose between either themselves and their friends and family being murdered, or they had to murder people they didn't know. So eventually, who is the victim and who is the criminal? You don't know. Another thing that they did was, in the beginning of those camps and of the gulags, the real criminals, like the psychopaths, they were appointed as camp guards, and they were crazy and they would do anything. They would torture everybody just for their own pleasure. But later on, they replaced those people for actually normal people like you and me. And they turned those people into those psychopaths. One Nazi camp guard said that he would torture people until he would ejaculate. And he scared himself so much for that, he realized that he became a monster. And he couldn't go back to his family, to his wife and his child, because he became a monster. How can you live a normal life after you've done things like that? So normal people were changed into monsters. There was no clear distinction anymore between victim and criminal, and the crimes were so great that you can't even call it crimes. And that's why it is so hard to believe that this all happened. That's why there are people, we call them the Holocaust deniers. That's why people don't believe it, because it is in fact unbelievable. The crimes were so great. We can't fit those things in our understanding of the world. Hannah Arendt explains way more about this subject, and she also explains how these kind of systems come to be. Maybe I will do a video about that in the future, but I'm not sure about that yet. I hope that I gave some insight in this topic, and I hope that I gave you some motivation to read the book for yourself, because I would really recommend reading this book. It's really great, and I think it's also important to understand this subject in order for this never to happen again. If you know the signs, then you can recognize things in life right now that would maybe lead toward a system like this, like Nazism and communism. And so that's why it's really important to understand this topic. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye!